My friends, rarely in history do we witness such a military debacle as the one the Syrian army went through last week. And the collapse was complete. Countless Syrian army units simply ran away from their combat positions.
Cowards! Our men flee the battlefield!
Not only that, but they also abandoned all their weapons, ammunition, but also their precious tanks, artillery, armored vehicles. They left everything behind. And now they're using these captured tanks and BMPs against their former owners. In the end, this is what allowed rebel forces to capture and secure Aleppo in only 4 days. Aleppo has fallen.
All hope is failing, my lord!
Hama has fallen, and rebel columns are now heading towards Homs. The question is, where are they going to stop?
Damascus, Orens. Damascus.
In other words, we can say that this halal blitzkrieg by the rebels was like kicking down a rotten tree. But who are these rebels? French media made sure for you to understand as clearly as possible who sponsored this offensive. Here from France 24, Syrian jihadists and their Turkish-backed allies. Or Le Monde, Turkey-backed jihadists. Contrary to regular insurgent forces, the ones that led the surprise offensive looked like a professional military. Their infantrymen were very well equipped. Entire armored units, tanks, BMPs, motorcycles, artillery batteries, and full-on drone detachments. Where did they get access to all this? In the end, while Russia was busy in Ukraine and Hezbollah in South Lebanon, Turkey sent its minions forward and they just sniped Assad's army. The sudden collapse of the Syrian army is also a painful blow to Russia's image. Remember when Ukraine announced that it was preparing for a new offensive? Nobody expected it to happen in Syria. Look at the uniforms of the rebels. They look familiar, eh? While the others have blue or green identification. You almost fooled us, Zelensky. Almost. Now for you to truly understand the significance of this collapse, we will have to go through a detailed step-by-step analysis of military operations, but also of the geopolitical situation that led to these events. Welcome to HistoryLegends, and here are the latest news of the Syrian Civil War. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Before I can start talking about military operations, here's a quick recap of the geopolitical situation in the region. Now I know you guys like to jump straight to the action, so to help you I added the chapters below. Long story short, the Syrian Civil War started in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring. At first, government security forces and the Syrian Arab Army were struggling. The regime of Bashar al-Assad was saved by the direct intervention of Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia. Soon enough, the focal point of this war took place around Aleppo, Syria's second largest city after the capital, Damascus. In December 2016, Syrian Arab Army units cleared Aleppo from rebel forces after 4 years and a half of fighting. However, in August 2016, the Turkish troops intervened directly into the Syrian Civil War. I made an entire video about it last year. If you're interested, the link is in the description below. But here are some samples of what I said. In February 2015, Turkey launched its first Han Solo military campaign abroad since 1974 with Operation Shah Euphrates, when an armored convoy of 600 troops was tasked to transfer the tomb of Suleiman Shah 30 kilometers to the north. It's important to mention that the majority of the officers of the Syrian SNA rebels are in fact ethnic Turkmen, one of the many minorities of Syria which have historical ties to Turkey, making for a total of 10,500 Turkish soldiers in the greater Idlib region. In 2017, the Al-Qaeda-related group called Al-Nusra from Idlib rebranded into Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which we will call HTS in this video. To break the deadlock in December 2019, the Syrian Arab Army, supported by Russian aerial assets, launched a massive offensive west of Aleppo which allowed them to regain a lot of territory. In March 2020, the presidents of Turkey and Russia, Erdogan and Putin, agreed to a ceasefire. and this should have been the end of the story. Bashar al-Assad managed to stay in power, but Syria was a shattered nation, with the government having lost control of huge parts of the country. Additionally, the effects of Western sanctions on the country caused a deep economic crisis that was worsening month after month. People had a hard time finding basic necessities, and the lack of fuel halted the steady flow of goods. This economic crisis also impacted the military. For example, soldiers who for the most part were conscripts were paid about $30 a month. Most units stood somewhere between 25 and 30% strength because soldiers bribed their officers to stay at home so they could go work instead of guarding an outpost somewhere in the desert. Meanwhile, higher ranking officers forgot to report broken vehicles so they could resell extra spare parts and fuel on the black market. Assyria's security apparatus was falling apart. Most of the Russian military personnel in Syria had redeployed to Ukraine, and many units of the Wagner PMC were transferred to Africa. Additionally, due to fears of a coup, the popular and charismatic commander of the 25th Tiger Forces Division, Suhail al-Hassan, was replaced and sent to command some 500-man strong Special Forces Battalion. Meanwhile, during those years, so from 2020 to 2024, HTS eliminated all competing jihadist groups in Idlib. In the end, 30,000 fighters in Idlib were directly under the umbrella of HTS. Rumors was that at one point they wanted to rebrand once again into 50 Shades of Jihad.
No prisoners! No prisoners!
Additionally, in the last years, they also received a lot of new military equipment. It literally just fell on their lap. Here from 2020, an M113 APC with Turkish camo. July 2021, we see some of their troops operating an M114 155mm howitzer that came straight from Turkish Army stocks. October 2021, another M113, once again from Turkey. Are we now allowed to call them a Turkish proxy or not? And of course, all these artillery pieces and armored vehicles were just meant to secure the ceasefire agreement. At last, from a political perspective, in late December 2022, Turkish and Syrian diplomats finally met to come up with a deal. However, after more than a year and a half, negotiations reached a dead end. Mainly because Bashar al-Assad insisted on a full Turkish withdrawal from Syria, while Russia was busy in Ukraine and Hezbollah with the IDF in South Lebanon. Turkey and its allies were plotting for their next move. Now you might ask, how come nobody saw this coming? So I thought it was important to analyze the events in the weeks leading up to the rebel offensive. Just take a look at what the SOHR wrote on the 4th of September. HTS and other factions are preparing to launch a large-scale attack on regime forces positions in the Russian-Turkish agreement area. And check out what Al Jazeera reported on the 13th of November. The Syrian opposition is preparing for the Battle of Aleppo and the Syrian regime is mobilized. Battle plans were known. The objective was known. How can we explain the collapse of the Syrian army and everything that happened? You have to remember that on the 1st of October, most Hezbollah forces were transferred to South Lebanon to counter the Israeli invasion. This significantly weakened the posture of the Syrian army. 1 week later, Russian Telegram channel Rybar reported the following. The Iranian government publication Tasnim, citing sources in Syria, reports that pro-Turkish forces in the Idlib de-escalation zone are preparing to intensify fighting against the Syrian government. With all these warning signs, the Russian command in Syria did not wait. On the 16th of October, the Russian Air Force carried at least 25 airstrikes in the Idlib region. For days in a row, Russian fighter aircraft and helicopters pummeled rebel positions. Between the 6th and the 7th of November, 34 FPV drone attacks were launched against rebel forces. Over 50 Russian drone strikes were carried out during that week alone. This was a new record. Never have so many drones been flying towards Idlib. If the situation could not get more complex, 2 days later, Israel also joined the fireworks with an airstrike 8 kilometers north of Sarakib, reportedly against Iranian assets. Also on the 9th of November, Turkish artillery shelled a Kurdish checkpoint of the YPG faction north of Manbij. And on the 14th, now it's Syrian artillery that bombarded rebel positions west of Aleppo. 3 days later, Idlib rebels posted a video of grenade-dropping drones. In this footage, we see them target a Syrian T-55 and then a T-72 Adra. Russia, Israel, Iran, Turkey. It's a real foursome with heavy loads flying across the room. And Syria will have to clean up the mess because they're hosting the party, while government forces and Idlib rebels bombarded each other. By the 18th of November, the Israeli Air Force destroyed a total of 15 bridges southwest of Homs in order to disrupt communication lines between Syria and Lebanon. 2 days later, on the 20th of November, Israel once again launched a series of airstrikes, this time in the desert town of Palmyra, which caused 108 fatalities, of which 73 were confirmed to be Syrian Army soldiers, 15 Hezbollah fighters, and 14 Iran-backed Iraqi militias. During this time, Russian assets on the ground anxiously noticed the movement and accumulation of rebel elements. Syrian intelligence officers expected an offensive since September. All the reports were sent up the hierarchy, but nothing was done. Actually, the Syrian army did redeploy some forces, but not towards Aleppo. More on that later. Between the 24th and 25th of November, Syrian army and Kurdish forces heavily shelled rebel positions in Al-Bab. In response, the SNA opposition forces used some MRLS systems to strike Kurdish positions. That same night, a Kurdish infiltration team carried out a recon in force and stormed an enemy outpost. Reportedly, 15 SNA fighters were KIA and another 5 were captured. However, we don't know what these prisoners revealed during the interrogation. On the 27th of November, the Syrian Observer reported, Netanyahu warns Bashar al-Assad. He specifically warned Assad against allowing weapons to pass through Syria to Hezbollah, saying, "Don't play with fire," and vowing to destroy the Syrian regime if it continued to support Hezbollah. Surprise, surprise, late on the 26th of November, Israel agreed to a ceasefire in South Lebanon. As the ceasefire came into effect in the first hours of the 27th of November, Idlib rebels launched their offensive against Aleppo.
You don't find that suspicious?
Officially, the offensive led by HTS, called Operation Deterrence of Aggression, was meant for a limited offensive to protect the civilians of Idlib from regime shelling. Are the Turks trolling? Because I've heard this story before. Day 1, the 27th of November. On the eve of the rebel offensive, the map looked approximately like that. In green you have all the Turkish proxies, with HTS in control of Idlib, with the Syrian National Army or SNA further north in Afrin and all the way to Al-Bab. In yellow you have the areas controlled by Kurdish militias, and in red territory controlled by Bashar al-Assad and government forces. In the early hours of the 27th of November, HTS special forces started infiltrating enemy lines. As you can see, these operatives are equipped like a modern military force. In here you can see them geared up with thermal scopes, which would provide them with a significant advantage while fighting at night. These Spec Ops units pushed deep into enemy lines and ambushed a number of units, like this group of Russian military personnel, who were later confirmed to be Russian drone operators. The first wave consisted of multiple katibas, or detachments in Arabic, of specialized assault squads who trained specifically to open a breach in the first enemy line of defense. In many of the videos that I will show you, what you will immediately notice is how HTS fighters are wearing blue bands on their forehead and arms for identification, while others are also wearing yellow ones. Same thing in this picture where we see very well equipped soldiers with yellow identification as well. In my opinion, there was some sort of hierarchy. The fighters with blue or yellow bands were part of specialized assault detachments, while the ones without markings were your average typical fighter. With that being said, I also spotted other units wearing green bands and even red ones. Overall, most riflemen are equipped with AKs and PKMs. For example, here's a Bulgarian copy of the PKM in the hands of an ethnic Turkmen from Syria. In the next frame, this truck has a heavy machine gun installed while carrying an entire squad of troops. In terms of individual equipment, here we see an RPG-7, which is a weapon of choice for insurgent forces in the Middle East. And at the back, a Turkish version of the US-made M72 Law anti-tank weapon. In this video, you can see that every second man is equipped with some anti-tank weapon, which they use to breach into walls and buildings. Although these assault detachments are very well equipped, it would not be enough to definitely break through the enemy lines of defense. To this effect, the HTS command created lightly armored katibas. We can see these assault detachments enter Al-Qarar APCs. Those are locally made armored personnel carriers, built on top of pickup trucks, which can transport at least half a dozen men. As you can see in this footage, many units were seen driving around aboard these locally made APCs. But this column was beefed up with the BMP-1, as well as this technical with a ZU-23-2 autocannon installed on it. Here's a glimpse into one of these armored katibas. One technical, 4 Karar APCs, one M113 APC, and they even have a captured T-72 tank to spearhead their assault. But simply upon contact, these armored assault detachments crushed the poorly trained Syrian conscripts holding the first line of outposts. The rebel offensive was also supported by motorized detachments, mostly composed of pickup trucks and technicals like the one you can see on screen, whose armament ranges from Chinese-made autocannons to machine guns and even Iranian-made recoilless guns. The same way centuries ago the Ottomans had regular formations supported by irregular light cavalry units called the Bashibazuk, but this time they traded their horses for Toyotas. At this point, it's very hard to mention any war in the Middle East without saying the word Toyota. While assault detachments engaged the first line of Syrian Army outposts, the HTS Falcons Brigade launched swarms of FPV drones to pin down enemy forces at the rear and help for recon purposes as well, which provided the HTS with a complete overview of the battlefield in real time. In this propaganda video, they even showed how they set up an entire line of production of FPV drones, just like in Ukraine. My friends, everybody's learning except NATO armies. In this footage, you can see kamikaze drones target exposed infantry units, some of them not even aware that an enemy offensive was underway. HTS drones also struck various bunkers, fortified positions, and trench lines, while others dropped grenades on rooftops and dugouts. More importantly, these drone strikes also took out a variety of armored vehicles, in a radius of up to 10 kilometers. Remember, those are the same tactics that the Azeri forces used against the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. On top of smaller drones, HTS also launched a number of turbojet-powered kamikaze drones whose payloads were much bigger. As you can imagine, this must have seriously impacted the reaction time and morale of government forces, as all the troops were essentially pinned down and could not mutually support each other. At least we can see how the Syrian army attempted to camouflage its parked vehicles under nets or even under buildings, garages. Hold on, now that I'm thinking about it, how come HTS drone operators knew the exact location of all these armored vehicles? And it's not as if they sent dozens of recon drones in the weeks leading up to the offensive. Or maybe they did without being detected. I mean, all the fortifications, trench works, and bastions were clearly visible using satellite imagery. And what is obvious is that all the defensive positions were fully exposed from above, and thus extremely vulnerable to drones. Additionally, these trench bastions could hardly support each other. If we look on the map, the HTS command attacked along 3 axes. One column penetrated towards Road 62, with another thrust towards Road 60. The objective of both of these groupings was Aleppo. This main attack was combined with a smaller operation in the south in the vicinity of Sarakib. Additionally, the combination of these 2 attacks was probably meant at capturing this entire portion of the M5 highway, thus prevent government forces from sending reinforcements to Aleppo. From all the information I gathered, it seems HTS assault detachments carried one attack south of Road 62 against the village of Al-Huta, combined with another one north of the road against the town of Kubtan al-Jabal. There we see some of the troops that captured the settlement. Most of them have yellow and blue armbands, and the only vehicle we see is a motorcycle. Once again, motorcycle units are perfect to maneuver units very quickly from point A to B. Additionally, because of this video, it seems local tribesmen of the Sunni al-Bakara tribe took up arms and switched sides in support of HTS. Soon enough, Syrian army units found themselves completely overwhelmed left and right. In this video that went viral, we see a squad of 12 Syrian army soldiers running away across open field. If we try to geolocate it on the map, here's the town of Qubtan al-Jabal and here's the road, meaning the soldiers fled in this direction. From Al-Hutta, the rebels then moved on to the larger settlement of Anjara. We know this because of the following video, where we see one of the fighters praying next to a statue at the center of the town. There, the HTS rebels captured numerous weapons, including this T-72 tank, probably the same we could see in this video. Meanwhile, their Habibis seem to have captured yet another tank in the same sector. Now in the area of Road 60, there was very little information I could work with, but we can guess that from a tactical perspective, the attack must have been pretty similar to the one on Road 62. But I did find this footage and perhaps it can help us put the pieces together of what actually happened. In this video, there is a rebel column led by a tank and followed by 2 APCs pushing along a road. Now what you see here is actually the HTS command center. What's crazy is that at some point they spot 3 Syrian army soldiers. The intelligence officers take pictures of these guys and send the info directly to their troops on the ground. Seconds later, the tank turns its turret, this APC disembarks its riflemen, and an explosion occurs right next to the government troops, which then run away. Look, the immersion is complete. We even got a glimpse at HTS nutrition. What I think is that the rebels regrouped in the village of Kafrtal, and from there they pushed southwards. This is what probably allowed them to reach Base 46. The base takes its name from the resident 46th Regiment of the 15th Special Forces Division, but it was also guarded by Iranian-backed militias and pro-Assad Palestinian fighters. HTS forces broke through the compound by detonating an SVBIED, a kamikaze vehicle packed with explosives, but less technologically advanced since it actually has a human driver. HTS assault detachments slowly started encircling the Syrian army base. Here we see rebel stormtroopers jump out of the Karar APC, and then we see them running along the perimeter wall, while their vehicle crashed into the wall, opening a breach. Then the fighters rush into the base, completely overwhelming the defenders. Within minutes, the base was theirs, with HTS fighters emptying all the warehouses looking for these loot boxes, thus providing rebel units with precious weapons and ammo supplies. Look, I saw some videos of the aftermath of this battle that I can't show you, but I'm not sure many prisoners were actually taken. Throughout the 27th of November, reports arrived of Syrian army reinforcements being rushed towards western Aleppo. It was pure cope because in reality it was the complete opposite. One HTS drone managed to record an entire company of 150 Syrian army soldiers packed into a crowd before harassing them with grenades. And it seems unlikely to me that they're walking in this formation towards the front. Meanwhile, the units that were motorized fled even faster to the rear. Meanwhile, 28 kilometers to the south, HTS also carried a limited-scale attack on Sarakib. The small number of units deployed during this attack made it seem as if it was some diversion. Nonetheless, in response, Syrian artillery units shelled the entire countryside around Sarakib. As night fell in Aleppo, the rebels managed to capture yet another regime-fortified position. On day 1, the defeat of the Syrian army was total. Entire units fled as they abandoned all their weapons and vehicles behind. They did not even bother to detonate ammo depots. All the military equipment was left there intact, ready to be recycled by HTS. By the end of the day, HTS had captured 18 villages and the military base number 46. Within 24 hours, Turkey's negotiating positions have sharply strengthened. Another Turkish trademark was the heavy use of foreign Muslim mercenaries. There were numerous reports of fighters from Central Asia, Uzbeks specifically from the Fergana Valley, but also Tajiks, Turkmen, Chinese Uyghurs, even Chechens.
Hey yo, what the?
Why did the Syrian army collapse? On the surface, we could say that the economic crisis took its toll on the military. Many vehicles could have simply been abandoned due to a lack of spare parts and even fuel. Certainly. But we cannot forget that barbarians can only capture a citadel if someone opens the gate to them. So I will lay out some of the reasons that I think led to the collapse of the Syrian army. As part of reason number 1, we cannot exclude the possible bribery of senior officers and generals. That could explain the lack of reactivity of the Syrian army despite all the warning signs. Even more troubling, in the summer of 2024, the elite 25th Tiger Force Division deployed key assets to fight insurgents in the Syrian desert. Almost the entire 5th Assault Corps was transferred all the way down south near Jordan. That's not all. Local defense units of the Shia towns of Nubul and Zahra, who are highly experienced, were also sent south to the desert. And I'm not done, because the Liwa Fatimun Iranian-backed Shia militias were also sent to the southern border. How come all of a sudden, this summer, some of the most well-trained, motivated and capable formations were all removed from the Aleppo sector, and especially not called back as everyone noticed military preparations in Idlib? Reason number 2 is similar, but it is attributed to treason. Disclaimer, what I'm going to tell you is speculation, but there's ground to believe that someone called Hajmera has betrayed the Assad government. He's one of the leaders of the Bedouin al-Bakara tribe. Long story short, the al-Bakara tribe was split between support of the opposition and the Assad regime. Hajmera formed a brigade of the pro-Assad elements and fought against opposition forces. Very well, actually. He was also so close to Iran that he even converted to the Shia faith. However, it seems that lately he got back in touch with the al-Bakara tribesmen in Idlib, the ones part of the opposition. In the end, supposedly, Hajmera and his men could have smuggled a number of HTS operatives from Idlib inside the Aleppo region. And we should not consider this story far-fetched, especially since we saw that members of this tribe took up arms against the government right after HTS attacked. And it's not a surprise either that some of the al-Bakara areas of control are located right at the border between HTS and government forces. They could have definitely opened the gates. It's possible that other Bedouin tribes like the Al-Babtush, Altai and Al-Kedat also joined al-Bakara in their treason. On top of that, we can believe that some of these units that were smuggled inside Aleppo could have created a number of sleeping cells that would have been activated on D-Day to cause panic and chaos behind enemy lines. Such psyops work especially well in the fog of war and with the lack of information. Recruitment for these cells could have been facilitated by the general discontent towards Bashar al-Assad because of the economic crisis, and that their lives could possibly be better under HTS control. Now, if we follow this logic, we can believe these operatives and sleeping cells stormed critical military headquarters and command centers. On the 29th of November, it was reported that the Iranian Brigadier General of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps was KIA, as well as Assad's military security branch in Aleppo, General Ahmad Qudr al-Ali. Those are only the ones we know of, but maybe there were others. Maybe some were captured. There were also reports of jamming of communications, even fake orders of withdrawal, which further must have increased the feeling of isolation and panic for frontline units. Another cause of the Syrian army's failure was the lack of any type of defense in depth. After HTS forces broke through the first line of trench works and fortifications, Syrian army units had nowhere to fall back to reorganize and counterattack. Day 2, the 28th of November. After breaking through, the grouping on Road 62 then split up. One detachment attacked to the north towards Anadan, while another pushed along Road 62 straight towards Aleppo. The grouping on Road 60 also split up like splinters. The main detachments continued along the main road towards Aleppo, while motorized columns spread across the countryside going as far as Azarba and Al-Ais. That's when they captured army warehouses in Miznas. There they found numerous ATGMs and even artillery pieces like these 122mm Gvazdika self-propelled howitzers. These jihadists know that when you find heavy howitzers, You just grabbed them! In the south, in the sector of Sarakib, it's the group Ansar al-Tawhid that led the charge. This time we even have a closer look at all the military equipment they had available. Their attack was supported by multiple artillery units, like this crew of Chinese Uyghurs, operating a 130mm D46 field gun and 122mm D30 howitzer using Iranian-made shells. One of the main objectives was Sarakib proper, as heavy fighting took place there. But while a number of Syrian army units were pinned down in that town, rebel jihadist assault detachments then stormed the border area south of Sarakib and captured the villages of Jubas and Dadir. Here you can see some of the men that captured this village of Dadir. I don't know, to me these guys look like mostly peaceful youth from South Rotterdam. In this footage we see explosives being dropped from a drone on a Syrian army tank, as well as on the soldiers right next to it. Meanwhile, we also got an HFPS, or Halal First Person Shooter experience, on the attack on the nearby village of Kafr Batih. We see an APC driving against a wall. Then it follows the tracks made by some previous vehicles. Then it crosses a field with a lot of small trees. And to its left then we see 3 big cylinders. I couldn't hold myself but to geek around. I looked all across the map and I actually managed to geolocate this exact attack. Here we see these same cylinders north of the village of Kafr Batir. If we reconstruct the attack, the rebels first captured Dadir, and from there they pushed along the main road towards Kafr Batir. More specifically, they drove parallel to the main road across the fields in between those houses all the way to this industrial sector. Then they drove past the cylinders, which you can see on screen. Then the infantry component was disembarked somewhere in the sector and engaged enemy forces. By the end of day 2 of the offensive, Islamist rebel forces had effectively taken control of this entire portion of the M5 highway that was linking Aleppo to the south of the country. It also became clear that the rebel offensive could not be stopped solely with airstrikes, as Russian and Syrian fighter aircraft carried one sortie after another, but it was just not enough. Day 3, the 29th of November. From all the videos I saw geolocated west of Aleppo, there was not one moment where a Syrian army unit actually stood its ground. The Syrian army in that sector literally melted down. In the south, rebel motorized columns had already pushed 10 kilometers beyond Sarakib. In that sector, it was a Chechen crew operating Turkish-made 120mm HY-112 mortars that supported the rebel offensive, while guiding their strikes in real time with drone footage. Another of such artillery batteries was manned by Uyghurs with a Turkish 155mm M114 howitzer. A couple hours later, we see another unit of foreign Muslim mercenaries, this time composed of Chechen fighters entering one of these Karar APC. Then this motorized column headed out for a night raid, where we see them engage a Syrian T-72 tank. They seem to have been victorious because moments later, they recorded vehicles and ammunition they had captured. And it's clear to see the tactical edge that HTS commandos had over Syrian forces due to their use of thermal scopes and NVGs. But those are not easy to fight with, you need a lot of training. Could it be that some of these men are veterans of the Russian armed forces?
Fuck.
Now as for the situation west of Aleppo. Overall, from an operational perspective, HTS forces of tactical grouping Road 60 and Road 62 linked up in one of the western suburbs of Aleppo, from where they converged as a unified force straight into the urban area. By 4 p.m., rebel forces had officially reached the outskirts of Aleppo. Here you can see the first rebel formations to step foot inside Aleppo proper. And that's how the cadets of the Assad Military Engineering School found themselves encircled. In Khan Assal, a T-55 was left behind by pro-Assad forces. The rebels even got their hands on a BMP-2. Meanwhile, the first ATGM teams took position on rooftops like this one equipped with a US-made BGM-71 TOW. Same thing for these guys operating one of the captured Russian Kornet ATGMs. And in the next frame, we see how they managed to destroy a Syrian army tank that was in a hull-down position. At the same time, rebel columns flooded the entire countryside south of Aleppo, 10 kilometers in this direction and 12 kilometers along the M5 highway. In that area, it was reported that 4 Syrian army tanks were captured in Khan Tuman. Nearby entire Syrian army units fled as they feared being encircled and captured by the enemy. If things could not be more critical for the Syrian Arab army, skirmishes suddenly broke out south of Al-Bab, 30 kilometers northeast of Aleppo. As you can see, SNA rebels started bringing their armored vehicles to the front, showing that an attack was imminent. If these positions collapsed, it would be GG, well played. Day 4, the 30th of November. I think day 4 was perhaps the worst for the Syrian government. The defensive perimeter of Aleppo had been completely breached. Rebel Islamist forces had crossed the Quake River and had taken control of the Aleppo citadel, where some of these soldiers now started raising the Turkish flag. Coincidence? I don't think so. It felt as if not a single Syrian army unit was present to defend the city. What happened? Did they all flee? Were they ordered to withdraw? I can't tell you, but fact is, HTS entered into an empty city. What also became obvious was the wide array of mercenaries paid by Turkey in the ranks of HTS. Here's an Albanian volunteer of the Jemati Alban unit. In this one, a volunteer from Pakistan next to a captured tank. Meanwhile, in this one, former TLB fighters from Afghanistan are seen operating a locally made MRLS. They should become the basis of a movie called A Fistful of Liras. HTS rebels were present at the Al-Qura roundabout in the heart of Aleppo. There, they immediately started tearing down statues related to the Assad family. Other rebel troops were seen everywhere in town celebrating their stunning victory. Listen habibi, I need a break, I need some chicken. Due to the complete collapse of government security forces, Kurdish SDF militias intervened. That's how Kurdish reinforcements have entered the Sheikh Maksud neighborhood of Aleppo and other Kurdish populated areas of the region. Other Kurdish militias regrouped in the Aleppo International Airport, where they covered the exodus of thousands of civilians, because they knew exactly what awaited them at the hands of Turkish proxies. However, at the same time, what surprised me is how from all the videos inside Aleppo, a lot of residents stayed in the city and acted as if it was just another day. Now, if we zoom out, all the villages along Road 214 were abandoned by government forces. Meanwhile, the Syrian rebels completely overwhelmed Kurdish positions south of Al-Bab. One group pushed as far as to reach the M4 highway, thus cutting off Aleppo from the east, while other motorized columns penetrated deeper and deeper across the countryside. One of these units captured abandoned Syrian army armored vehicles in the village of Abu Jabar. It was an unmitigated disaster. Forward elements of rebel forces were spotted 23 kilometers ahead of the contact line, meaning they had effectively cut the highway linking Aleppo to Raqqa. Meanwhile, the highway linking Aleppo to the south was also cut, meaning Aleppo was now fully isolated. In the south, after the fall of Sarakib, once again the Syrian army evaporated, and that's where we saw the rebels make the most gains in a single day. All the villages in a 45-kilometer radius of Sarakib were captured and under their control. Not only that, Syrian army units in Marat al-Numan were completely overwhelmed. This time it was a unit composed of Tajiks, Uzbeks and Uyghurs that led the assault. As you can see in this video, the squad entered a BMP-1, while others were sitting inside a truck. The vehicles then disembarked the soldiers, which then ran into the town. To the right, a Karar APC drives by, after which the riflemen proceeded to mop up the entire settlement as night fell. After the fall of the stronghold, the rebels pushed 40 kilometers along the M5 highway, all the way to the town of Suran on the outskirts of Hama. That should have been another stronghold that should have stopped the jihadists. Instead, local reports then announced the withdrawal of government forces from the town. In turn, the rebels continued all the way to the northern outskirts of Hama aboard their technicals, like these ones equipped with ZU-23 and ZPU-2 autocannons. The attack was spearheaded by this Uyghur battalion, motorcycle squads and many Al-Qarar APCs for mobility, entire artillery batteries to support the attack, with BMPs and entire assault detachments clearing the city. To me, this looks like a professional fighting force. Others pushed westwards towards the Mediterranean coast, like these troops that filmed themselves in Kalat al-Madik. After days and days of bad news for the Syrian Arab army, it was finally reported that pro-Assad forces managed to create some sort of defensive line 10 kilometers north of Hama, namely soldiers of the Tarmiya regiment of the elite 25th Division. Meanwhile, in Hama proper, numerous Syrian army armored vehicles were spotted by local residents. It seemed that this would be the location of the final showdown between HTS and the Syrian army, the helms deep of the Syrian Civil War, because if the stronghold collapsed, then it would be very difficult. After that, it's Homs, and if that falls, the country is literally split in two. In preparation for the final assault, HTS mustered all their drone operators to harass the defenders and destroy all their fortified positions. Day 5, the 1st of December. By day 5, most of Aleppo was under rebel control. They even managed to take control over the Assad Military Engineering Academy. What most likely happened is that they managed to broker a deal with the hundreds of defenders and allowed them to withdraw towards friendly lines. Here you can see some rebel fighters inside this very symbolic compound of the Syrian army. The rest of the city and the northeastern outskirts were taken up by Kurdish militias. But soon enough, they also felt the heat of the enemy offensive, as rebel forces already started converging their armored vehicles to crush this Kurdish salient north of Aleppo centered on Tal Rifat. But it's not looking good for them, especially since in this video we already see rebel fighters at the entrance of the town. And I also fear the worst for all these Kurdish fighters that were captured and that will most likely be handed over directly to Turkish authorities. As for the Kurds in the Sheikh Maksud neighborhood, well, they have nowhere to run. So this should be a tough nut to crack for HTS. In turn, HTS offered them these green buses in order to transport all these fighters and their family members to friendly lines. And if they refuse, well, face annihilation. Meanwhile, the rebels that broke through in Al-Bab kicked out the Kurds from a good portion of the Aleppo-Raqqa highway. In that area, 30 kilometers east of Aleppo, rebel forces captured the Koueres military airport. There they captured a number of aircraft, but most importantly, this Panzer air defense system. The shock was that out of nowhere, Al-Safira was now occupied by rebel forces. Here you can see some of these assault detachments pushing across the countryside. By the evening of December 1st, the front more or less stabilized north of Hama. A Syrian army mechanized units arrived to reinforce the defense of the city. Additionally, after a counterattack, Syrian army units retook control of Murada and Halfia. The Syrian government and its allies also did not stand still. Reportedly, thousands of Shia militiamen converged towards the Iraqi-Syrian border. As you can see in this video, mostly light infantry on pickup trucks, but at this point any additional help was welcomed. At the same time, it was later reported that they literally stopped at the border. It was also reported that Bashar al-Assad held a meeting with the Iranian foreign minister, who urgently flew to Syria. Apparently they discussed direct military support from Iran. There's also the possibility of Syria calling the Arab League for help, but that is to be determined. Across Syria, the arrival of these barbarian hordes caused panic among the population, especially among the Alawite and Christian minorities. Many territorial defense units formed out of thin air, composed of army veterans and even simple civilians motivated by patriotic fervor. On their end, the Kurds also called for volunteers to protect their homeland. My friends, this is how Aleppo fell, and how HTS forces caused the complete collapse of the Syrian army. Days 6 to 10, December 2nd to the 6th. After the capture of Aleppo, Commander Jolani called for all civilians to be spared, regardless of their religious faith. Goes to show that even jihadists have to add a little bit of water in their wine if they want to rule. However, they could also play nice for the moment and become more strict as they consolidate power. There were also reports how HTS dispatched their own police units to secure Aleppo, while redirecting combat formations to support the ongoing offensive against Hama, and not lose momentum. The next day, by the 3rd of December, Jolani, the leader of HTS, finally visited the captured city of Aleppo. Simultaneously, Kurdish militias expanded their area of control south of Raqqa, following the withdrawal of pro-Assad forces. We're actually witnessing a Mexican standoff, where pro-Assad forces, jihadists and Kurdish militias all oppose each other. Meanwhile, 4 kilometers north of Hama, the Syrian army fortified this hilltop in an attempt to stop the rebel offensive. However, pro-Assad forces were heavily outnumbered, as thousands of rebel reinforcements headed southwards. In this case, we see a unit composed of fighters from Afghanistan and Pakistan, supported by tanks and BMPs. Meanwhile, these Uyghur volunteers managed to destroy a Syrian army BMP with a captured Russian Kornet anti-tank missile somewhere on the northern outskirts of Hama. At the same time, the HTS Falcons Brigade dropped so many loads on the Syrian army that movement became very difficult, added to the numerous MRLS strikes of HTS on enemy strongholds and fortifications. There was a lot of back and forth over the Zain al-Abidin hill, but Syrian army counterattacks faded away and lacked momentum due to the non-stop enemy drone attacks on their concentration of forces. The defense of Hama became desperate when HTS columns started encircling the city from both the west and the east. Pro-Assad forces knew not to allow the two tips to touch, so they had no other choice but to withdraw. While overall the withdrawal was coordinated, this sudden movement left a lot of stragglers behind. There's this video that went viral where we see HTS forces using captured Syrian army vehicles, a column composed of 1 T-72 M1 and 3 BMPs. And these vehicles then attacked this retreating enemy unit. At first, pro-Assad soldiers thought the vehicles were friendly, until they started charging at them, ramming their vehicles and firing at point blank. The next day, by the 4th of December, HTS discovered all the military equipment, all the vehicles that the Syrian army had abandoned in Hama. In this case, we see what they found in the HQ of the elite 25th Tiger Forces Division. Even worse, this is what the rebels found in Base 87. At least 20 trucks, BMPs and truck-mounted rocket artillery systems. At the same time, we can't say the Syrian army did not fight looking at the entrance of this city. HTS then pursued the Syrian army up until the Rastan Bridge, which is one of the only crossing points over the Orontes River. If properly defended, this river could have put a definitive stop to the HTS offensive. However, this hope collapsed 24 hours later. A rebellion broke out in Talbise, thus disrupting Syrian army communication lines. Meanwhile, HTS shock units bypassed the river via Road 45 and flanked the entire Syrian army's line of defense from the east. Upon their entry in Salamia, the rebels were welcomed like liberators. The Syrian army had no other choice but to quickly withdraw all the way to Homs. Meanwhile, in Aleppo, the Kurdish fighters were still in control of the Sheikh Maksud neighborhood. By December 6, forward elements of HTS reached the outskirts of Homs. We can believe that this is where the decisive battle between the rebels and pro-Assad forces will take place. If Homs falls, then the last stand will take place in the capital, Damascus. Meanwhile, in the south, near Dera, a rebellion broke out, and rebels captured a number of Syrian army vehicles that were left behind. At last, on the 7th of December, as both sides brought their forces towards Homs, in the eastern side of the country, Kurdish forces took control of Deir ez-Zor, as well as of the strategic Kamal border crossing point with Iraq. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.